Well, thank you for joining us today. And before I begin, I just want to acknowledge the country that I'm currently located on. Today, I'm located in the Darawal Nation, and I acknowledge with deep respect the traditional custodians of the land, the Wadi Wadi people. I pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and to the Aboriginal community that continue to care for country. I stand for a future that profoundly respects and acknowledges Aboriginal perspectives, culture, language, and history, and a continued effort to fight for Aboriginal justice and rights, paving the way for a strong future. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Sarah O'Shea. I'm the Director of the National Centre for Student Equity in Higher Education, NESHE for short. NESHE is housed at Curtin University, funded by the Commonwealth Government, with a dedicated mission to improve the higher education outcomes, access, participation, retention, success and completion rates for marginalised and disadvantaged people. We do this through a variety of strategies, including research, practice and policy. Today I have the great pleasure of introducing Dr. Katelyn Barney, who was awarded a year-long Equity Fellowship to explore an evidence base to support effective outreach strategies for Indigenous students in order to increase the impact and university participation of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students. This is a fascinating project and so well needed in the sector. My own involvement with outreach over the years has taught me there's so much more that we can learn and how we can do this effectively in a variety of settings and contexts. Today, Katelyn will also be joined by Professor Maria Rossetti from the University of the Sunshine Coast, who is also involved in the project, participating in Katelyn's advisory committee. And the session will be facilitated by Dr. Nicole Crawford. Nicole has just completed her own fellowship looking at regional, rural and remote mature age students and their mental health and well-being. We've taken a slightly different approach to this presentation and asked each of the fellows to prepare a sort of a TED-type talk where they will focus in on a specific element of their research. This is then followed by a live Q&A session, which today, as I said, will be facilitated by Nicole. So without further ado, I'm going to stop now and introduce Katelyn's short video presentation. Thank you.
Hi everyone. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands where I am today and paying my respects to their ancestors and their descendants who continue to have strong spiritual and cultural connections to country. I also want to thank and acknowledge the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander advisory group that are working with me on my fellowship. I'm a non-Indigenous woman born and raised here on Jagera and Turrbal land, and I want to thank and acknowledge the advisory group's support and guidance while I'm undertaking this fellowship. I'd like to first share a story of one of the students who I've interviewed. So Sarah is an Aboriginal student studying science at university. When she was in grade 10, Sarah attended an interstate 5-day outreach camp at a university with 25 other Indigenous school students. This was her first time out of her home state. She knew she wanted to attend university, but that would make her the first in her family to do so, and she didn't know if she could afford it. The camp was a taste of what it's like to attend university. She did fun workshops across different disciplinary areas, experienced a residential college, visited the Indigenous Centre on campus and found out about the financial and social support that was available for her. These were all great experiences. What made the greatest impact for Sarah was the people that she met. When I interviewed Sarah for this project, she said the best aspect was meeting other Indigenous school students with dreams and goals like hers to attend university. She described it as being like a family. She was also really inspired by the Indigenous university students who were mentors and ambassadors on the camp, many of whom had attended a similar or the same camp while they were at school. The camp demonstrated to Sarah that going to university could be a reality, not just a dream. She applied for that university and she's now a student there. She keeps in touch with the students she met on that grade 10 camp and also those she met on a second camp she attended in grade 12. She's also now a student ambassador on that camp. Sarah's story is an example of what works in outreach programs for Indigenous students. So most universities run camps for Indigenous school students to introduce them to university. So certainly the case for these initiatives is strong, as there's much evidence around the barriers that Indigenous school students face in entering into university. And the programs have many similarities. They're usually 3 to 5 days on-campus experiences where students get to do lots of different activities, and is usually run by Indigenous and non-Indigenous outreach staff and Indigenous student mentors as well. So as Sarah's story attests, these camps work for some students, but we don't really understand how or why. And so this is what my research fellowship is trying to find out. And my drive to do this is because I want to understand what works. And this is echoing lots of previous research by Indigenous scholars talking about the importance of focusing on success. As Bronwyn Fredericks notes, what constitutes success remains an important question that must be addressed from the different perspectives of the Indigenous student, the institution, the government, and the broader Indigenous community. For example, if an Indigenous student attends a camp but then goes on to attend a different university, this shouldn't necessarily be considered a failure because the focus is on this student and their individual pathway into university. So today I want to focus on 3 success factors of outreach camps for Indigenous students and 3 suggested strategies to improve outreach camps for Indigenous students. So the number 1 success factor is connections. So the connections and networks that students make while attending the camps. So family is a word that came up many times in interviews with students. Students talk about the importance of meeting like-minded Indigenous students from diverse places on the camps, and they realise that they're not alone in their experiences and their goals. They report on keeping in touch with this network afterwards, and many continue to friendships on campus. One student said, "Uni is such a white space," which highlights just how important these networks and friendships are. This is supported extensively in the literature on Indigenous students and their transition into university. The number 2 success factor is the ambassadors or mentors. So for the Indigenous school students, meeting Indigenous university students who are already on campus is a really important factor. Students talk about how inspiring it is to meet them and the realisation that university study is possible and achievable. And ambassadors are an important part of demystifying university and demonstrating how, for Indigenous students, they can navigate, survive and thrive at university. And the 3rd success factor is the experiences. So experiencing practical activities in specific disciplinary areas balanced with cultural activities. Students speak with excitement about getting the opportunity to participate in hands-on physics activities or visiting labs or other exciting hands-on activities, but equally important is cultural activities such as yarning circles around cultural identity. So I'll now talk about 3 suggested strategies to improve outreach camps. So the number 1 suggested strategy is more post-camp engagement. So students talked about how they would like further follow-up from outreach staff after attending the camp. And also staff talked about this, that this was something that could be done better. So this could be done through phone calls, further phone calls to the student after attending the camp, or perhaps bringing the group back together to either face-to-face or online to ensure that that relationship and that connection is continued. And this would allow for a further focus on the whole of student life cycle through school into university and beyond. So the number 2 suggested strategy for improving outreach camps is building further Indigenous perspectives into the curriculum. This is something that both staff and students talked about could be done further. And certainly some camps do include Indigenous perspectives on that disciplinary area. But this could be further strengthened with collaboration between Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander centres at the university and outreach staff to ensure that Indigenous perspectives are included in the curriculum. And the number 3 suggested strategy for improving outreach camps is further collaboration between outreach staff and researchers. So many of the staff talked about they would like to further collaborate with researchers to evaluate their programs or learn more about how to evaluate their programs. So part of my fellowship is developing some resources that are for outreach staff, so tips on evaluation as well as Indigenous perspectives on how to evaluate programs. Certainly evaluation in Indigenous higher education is more and more important, especially in this socially distanced world where universities are navigating and trying to respond and innovate in this socially distanced world. So many students like Sarah that I talked about at the beginning have attended multiple camps or returned multiple times to the same camp. And certainly camps are an important part of a suite of outreach activities that can help lead Indigenous students in a pathway onto university. And I hope my fellowship findings can further strengthen evaluation of Indigenous specific outreach programs and therefore strengthen those pathways for Indigenous students into university.
Well, I'm sure everyone will agree that was a really interesting snippet of Katelyn's fascinating research, and all the better for you doing it, Katelyn, in a very difficult year. So I'm going to pass over to Katelyn and Maria now with Nicole. And thank you, Maria, for joining today's session and being involved in this Q&A. I just want to remind everyone that we do have the Q&A box open, ready for questions. We don't have any questions as yet, but we have lots of action in the chat pod. So if anyone has a question, please post it now. Okay, over to you three.
Thank you, Sarah. Hello, Katelyn and Maria, and hello to everyone joining us today around the country. I'd like to acknowledge the Followup people, the traditional custodians of the lands where I'm talking to you from today in Lutruwita, Tasmania. And I'd like to pay my respects to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander colleagues in our webinar. Welcome everyone, and thank you, Katelyn, for the lightning talk. It was really informative and succinct about what works and some ideas for really strengthening the uni outreach camps. So I'm really looking forward to exploring these ideas further with you now and with Maria. So yeah, Maria is joining us as a guest presenter, and Maria is a member of Katelyn's Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Advisory Group for Katelyn's fellowship project. So we have about 40 minutes to have questions and answers and have a conversation. And yes, as Sarah mentioned, there's the chat for comments, there's the Q&A for questions for Katelyn and Maria. So I'm keeping my eye on the Q&A, but I also have quite a few questions from a few of you already. Quite a few of you actually asked questions when you registered. So thanks heaps for those. We hope to get through those as well. So to start with, Katelyn, can you tell us a bit about how you actually came to this topic for your fellowship in the first place?
Okay, thanks Nicole. Hi everybody. I'll also just start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands where I am today and pay my respects to their ancestors and their descendants who continue strong spiritual and cultural connections to country. So I've been working at the University of Queensland in the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Studies Unit for the last 12 years. And I've been working on research that's really about pathways for Indigenous students into university and strategies to support Indigenous students. I also did an OLT National Teaching Fellowship that looked at pathways from undergraduate study into research higher degrees for Indigenous students. So that kind of led me to doing this fellowship. Also, my background's in music. My PhD was actually working with Indigenous women who perform in contemporary music contexts, and I continue to do collaborative research with Indigenous researchers on music making as well. But really, as well, it came out of discussions with Professor Bronwyn Fredericks, who's the PVC Indigenous Engagement at UQ. And she'd said to me, you know, many universities have outreach programs, and particularly camps for Indigenous students, but there's not a lot of published evidence about those, you know, the impact of those programs and students' experiences of those programs. And I'd also talked with outreach staff about what, you know, programs they were doing and what kind of data they were already collecting and what, you know, further data they'd like to gather to improve the programs. So that's really what led me to the project.
Great, thank you. Now, in your video, you mentioned that you worked with an Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander advisory group, and I know that you also worked with an Indigenous research assistant on the fellowship. Can you tell us about how you collaborated with everyone?
Yep, so I worked with an advisory group, and also Hayley Williams, who's a current UQ PhD student who's just finishing her PhD. She's been great to work with as a research assistant. You know, so I'm a non-Indigenous researcher working in this space, and I'm, you know, really aware of the complexities and tensions around that. And my research, I try to approach, I guess, is to be really collaborative, and I've done a number of collaborative research projects with Indigenous researchers, and I'm always, you know, thinking about, you know, the R's of working with Indigenous people in terms of respect and relationships and reciprocity, self-reflection on my own positioning and representation, and they're all really embedded in, you know, the code of ethics that IATSIS, you know, release. So that's the kind of background to that. And so I invited a number of Indigenous researchers, experts, scholars to be part of the advisory group, and I'm very grateful for them for being part of it. And Maria is one of the members of this advisory group. And so we've had 2 advisory group meetings, one at the beginning of the fellowship to ensure the timeline and the plan for the fellowship was in place. And then we had another second advisory group meeting recently that was to look at the data and the findings and talk about, you know, the development of resources as well for outreach staff. And then I've also asked the advice of advisory group members individually along the way about different aspects. And then working with Hayley, as I mentioned, has been fantastic. She and I have collaborated really on the project and undertaken the ethical clearance together and shared doing the interviews. So it's been a very collaborative work.
Thank you. Now, we've got a couple of questions in the Q&A that we'll address right now, I think. That flows on nicely. So actually, it might make sense to start with the one about the data that you collected. So we have a question here from Janine. So can you tell us a bit more about the kinds of data that you collected?
Yep, so did interviews, 32 interviews with current university students, Indigenous university students who did outreach camps while they were at school, as well as 15 interviews with outreach staff who run programs, Indigenous specific outreach programs, and they're Indigenous and non-Indigenous staff. And then also 5 interviews with parents or caregivers of those students who we interviewed. So there's that rich data, as well as a survey that was sent out nationally to Indigenous centres, and that was targeting, again, current university, Indigenous university students who did outreach programs while they were at school.
Okay, thank you. Now, there's a question about the camps and about what age they should start. And you mentioned the story of Sarah. You know, Sarah did a camp, what was that, year 10, year 12, and then she's now at university. So I'm wondering, Katelyn, if you can give us a sense if that's kind of a pretty typical pathway. But also, Maria, you might like to talk a bit about this as well in regard to the question about age and the timing. Is it better that they're, say, in year 7 or year 8 versus year 10 and year 12? And then the question in the chat also asks about the role that parents should play in the camp. So there's quite a few aspects to that. So I'll throw those questions over to both of you.
Do you want me to answer?
Over to you first, Katelyn.
Katelyn.
Yep.
Okay. yes, that many of the students who I interviewed had done multiple camps, and many of them are more in grade 10, 11 and 12. And there's that many camps that are for, say, grade 7. And Maria can talk to this in terms of the timing of outreach from her research is so key. And so I think that's something that's probably missing, is that there are many more camps that are focused on 11 and 12, and the students who I interviewed who did those camps at 11, 12, they were already thinking about going to uni, and it was more about, fine tuning which uni they might go to or which particular disciplinary area. So I think that timing of outreach is so key, and that perhaps having more camps that are for younger students would be really beneficial.
Yeah, and as Katelyn mentioned, so my research, both in the fellowship and in other projects, identified exactly that students move through a process of making the decision to go to university. And what happens is there's often the crystallization of what they're going to be when they grow up. So it's called the crystallization of occupational self. And this occurs in late primary school in years 5 to 6. And it was identified that this is students from all backgrounds, but in particular, there was a bit of a lag for students from low SES backgrounds and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students in terms of progressing through this crystallization and sort of answering that question we all give young people is, what do you want to do when you grow up? As students moved into early high school, years 7 and 8, this is when they started to explore occupations. So it was a really critical time because they had opened up to a whole wealth of possibilities. They hadn't cut off any pathways at that stage. So they were still very much exploring occupations. And what my research found was that there was a lag between the crystallization and the exploration amongst low SES and Indigenous students. So this is where WP was key. The timing right in that critical point would help students to advance their exploration. So what it found is that students from other SES backgrounds sort of moved through exploration much more quickly, which meant that came to a decision about whether or not to go to university and what to do. They arrived at it quicker, which meant that they were more prepared. So in years 9 and 10, that's when the occupational decision is made. And the key point, of course, being the beginning of term 3 of year 10. That is an absolute critical incident, because that's the point at which students will identify if they are on the ATAR pathway or not. So that decision has to be made by then. So WP just prior, in those first 2 semesters, or term 2 if you like, of year 10, absolutely essential. And then in year 11 and 12, they move to affirming, which basically is, have I made the right decision? So they're looking for that feedback to know that they're on the right path. So these camps and demonstration of community and all those sorts of things help to affirm to them that they are doing the right thing. And then in year 12, it's confirming. So it gets right into that nitty gritty of which campus, which degree, and precisely what I want. So it comes down to logistics as well. Do I have to relocate? What does this mean for me? But as you can see, right at the very beginning, that between crystallization in late primary school and exploration in years 7 and 8, that's where the lag is, and that's where outreach is best placed.
Thank you both. A theme that's popped up in each of the lightning talks this week has been about the importance of connections and relationships. And again, it's a major theme today, Katelyn. It's one of your key success factors. So I'm wondering if you could elaborate on that a bit, tell us a bit more about why connections are so important. And to you, Maria, obviously these camps are face to face. So I'm wondering, Maria, if you'd like to share some thoughts on what it all might mean in in our new COVID world online. So start with you, Katelyn, and then to Maria.
Yes, and I had noticed that as well, watching the other talks this week, that connections kept coming up as well. And that was a really strong theme that came through interviews with students and staff, and the connection, the peer connections that Indigenous students make with other Indigenous school students is something that was really key, that they talked about, that they got to meet other like-minded Indigenous students who were thinking about going to uni like them. And then there's also the connections they make with the ambassadors or mentors mentors working on the camps and getting to see what the experience of going to uni would be like, and talking about what it's like as an Indigenous student to be at university, and also the connections between staff and students as well. So I think it is really key, and it's a strong theme that came through all of this fellowship.
Yeah, and completely agree, of course. The idea there too, sort of just when you were talking, Katelyn, it reminded me of sort of that notion of being, becoming and belonging. And this is what these connections do. They identify and introduce people to other like-minded Indigenous students like them. So there is that sense of belonging, and also aspirational in terms of people who are becoming who they want to be, or doing what they want to do, so to speak. So with other research that I've done in this space, I had a project a few years ago that I called iPlace, so Indigenous Place, and it was looking at how Indigenous students, the sense of place that Indigenous students have on university campuses. And one of the really interesting things about those connections is that it not only was a connection with helping people to form, shape their professional identity and start to develop a sense of professional identity about what they want to do, but most importantly too, the camps help them with that affirmation of Indigenous self. So it only, for some, it strengthened who they knew they were. For others, it helped them it alleviated shame or other experiences that they had in the past. As we know, Indigenous students are a very small percentage of students across all schools. So coming to these camps and being a part of, if you like, a concentration of like-minded students with the same aspirations, or with aspirations, was really quite helpful and affirming in, I think, deep ways for people to say, yes, I can be a part of this, and an affirmation of this is possible, this is something that I can do. Obviously moving into with COVID and that idea of how can we replicate this in a digital environment, I guess that's also part, I think, having taught myself for most of this year online, I know that it is possible to build sort of those authentic relationships, and you can do that online in an environment, and you can create immersive environments for students to be a part of. But even just in terms of social capital, of connecting people together in virtual worlds, so that when they do, or if they do come together face to face, they have someone else to talk to. So the isolation is gone, and with isolation going, also self-doubt leaves as well, or confidence grows.
Thank you. We have a question here in the Q&A pod. So you've focused on 3 critical success factors, and then 3 areas that can be strengthened. And the question is about, are there things that could be improved? So are there some things that should be removed from these types of camps?
I don't think there are necessarily things that should be removed, but I guess the post-engagement was something that came out strongly. Both staff talked about that they thought that the post-engagement with students could be better, as well as students said that they would have liked more follow-up. And I guess that's about also the connection and continuing the relationship. But it also could be about asking the students, well, what didn't work, I guess, and could be, to continue that. But certainly that post-camp engagement, I think, is something that could be improved. And then, of course, the discussion around, outreach staff talked about they would like to know more about how to evaluate their own programs. So they might use a survey, but not we're quite sure about how to implement the feedback. So I think further resources for outreach staff is really key, or opportunities to collaborate with researchers to evaluate their programs.
And I'd just like to...
Yeah, do you want to jump in there, Maria, for sure?
Sorry, and just amplify the point about that post-experience engagement, in terms of seeing it as the beginning of a relationship that's built between the university outreach staff and the students themselves, irrespective of where they go on. These connections are important and rich, I think, for the bigger issue around social good and social justice for Indigenous people.
Thank you. So you've elaborated on one of the critical success factors. Could you maybe elaborate a bit more on another? And that was about the role of the ambassadors in the outreach camps. That's to you, Katelyn.
Okay, yep. So different camps seem to call them different things, ambassadors or mentors or other terms, and they're really key. They're current, usually Indigenous university students, some of whom have done the camp themselves, which is always a really nice link between that they themselves had that outreach experience and now are at university. And again, it's about those connections between the school student and the university students, and university students talking about, well, what's their experience like on campus, and in varying degrees in different camps. Ambassadors in some actually lead the camps or have varying roles, but a thing that students really talked about was very key, and some of those connections students maintain. So they might have met a mentor while they were a student on camp, and they continued that connection, and it was somebody they knew then on campus when they became a student as well. So they are a really key part.
Thank you. I've got a question here from a participant. They popped this question in when they registered, and it is, what is the current percentage of discrepancy in Indigenous outreach and engagement in university? So I think what they're asking here is, what percentage of students say who attend an outreach camp go on to uni? So I'm wondering if either of you have answers to that question, or thoughts on, you know, what might be being measured here, and what does that mean?
I'll let you go first, Katelyn.
Okay. It is very difficult to measure. Some universities do gather data around, they might know how many students, which students have done camps at their universities and then come to that university, but then might not know if that student had then gone on to a different university. And there's no national data on that engagement in outreach and then transition to university. And it is difficult to measure. And it's also a question around, well, what does success mean in this context? And is it only about, you know, that student going on to that university, or to university in general? Or if a student decides that uni is not for them, that could still be a success in terms of students making the decision what's right for them. So I think there's a lot of you know, questions around, well, what does success? And of course, success means different things to different people as well.
Yeah, and it probably for me touches on the tension that I think is often the elephant in the room, which is what's the difference between marketing, recruitment and WP. I think WP, we need to have a much stronger argument around this idea that WP is about the social good, and it's about providing these opportunities. And Mary Kelly always expressed it well, that WP is come to university, whereas marketing has come to our university. So this is where the tangle or the tension start to arise with evaluation, because in order for WP activities and outreach, the evaluation is needed to demonstrate it. I always look at WP as a return on objectives rather than a return on investment. And I think it's important that it's framed up that way. I also think it's valuable for people conducting outreach to make sure that they are evaluating or have an evaluation schedule in place so that they're able to demonstrate that. Often I think the impression I get is that further upstream in university hierarchy, the interest is on that conversion rate between how many came to the camp and then how many enrolled. So I think it's important that the counter argument that WP is about the greater social good and addressing inequality and inequities rather than it being on recruitment and conversion.
Thank you. We've got a couple of questions here in the Q&A. So the first one I'll ask to both of you, and it comes from Kate, and Kate's a learning advisor at USQ, and she's just explaining that they're soon to welcome some Indigenous learning advisors to their team in the library, and they're looking forward to this and the knowledge and perspectives that they will bring to their team and to the university more broadly. Do you have any suggestions for how these advisors could best support outreach activities at the university?
That's a really interesting question. I guess it's been out of the scope of my work, but it's a really interesting point. I guess in some universities, learning advisors are quite separate to outreach staff, although of course there's crossovers and you know, there should be collaboration in that space. Maria, did you want to add anything?
So I was just actually answering a question at the same time, so not paying a huge amount of attention. Sorry, just being myself here. So that was about the interaction with learning teachers. with learning advisors. Look, I think there's lots of influences that are a part of this process. It's a very much the village that comes together to inform and give great advice to people and to help them to, I guess, shape their path and author their own future for them. Even as you found in your research, influence from teachers, tutors and lecturers was pretty key, but I think any person within the university has that power. Remembering that universities are big places and people are still looking for personal relationships and points of contact, and touch points, any touch point I think is incredibly valuable to helping someone along their journey.
Thank you. Maria, there's a question here for you about the outreach camps and the best years. So you know, you mentioned, say, year 7 and 8. The question's about what style of outreach is best for certain years. So year 7 and 8, example, visit schools or have camps at uni. And if camps, how to make it to be age suitable for years 7 and 8 as opposed to years 10 to 12.
So of course it has to be age and stage appropriate. So sometimes these are about, often what I found was that students, by the time they got to junior high school, that year 7 and 8, had already decided if they were going to go or not. They may not have known what they were going to do or where they were going to go, but it's called circumscription of the decision process. They'd already said, oh, that's not for me. So I think a part of this is about, I think in one of my reports I'd actually said, you know, even if this idea of posters in the school that says uni is for everyone, or something as simple as that, where it is promoting this idea that don't cut off this option just now. In terms of age and stage appropriateness, yes, I think you start with perhaps smaller visits to campus, which we know work well, or virtual campuses, which we know we can do as well, and that type of engagement, moving up towards more immersive experiences in 7 and 8, such as day trips, and something that's longer than an hour, basically. That's a couple of hours moving up to a camp. I think it's important. One of the things I found in other research too was that when outreach, you know, there's a very important relationship between outreach staff and principals. Principals are very much have a very, very important role and are very much the gatekeepers, and sometimes don't necessarily understand the difference between wanting participation activities and marketing. So when they're approached about these types of things, that may be why outreach is funneled to years 10, 11 and 12, because they're thinking it's more along that recruitment process than it is along introducing the idea that university is a possibility for people as well. So I think right at that beginning, it's just might be questions along, what do you know about university? Has anyone in your family gone before? Who do you think goes to university, or why would you need to? So just sort of these very, you know, sort of questions that just promote thought about it without driving them into a decision, because it's too premature. They don't have decision-making ability at that stage, and even by the time they reach grade 10, they still don't have the ability to make complex decisions, which is what they're being put on. One of the biggest things we see in young people is that they think that if they choose to go to university, or once they choose a career, that they're locked into it. So they still have this sense, but what we find in year 5, 6, 7 and 8, there's this sort of imagination. I called it dreaming. They're dreaming of all the possibilities, of all the possible future selves that they could be. So I would just start out with those simple questions, moving to more campus visits, more resources being made available, and opportunities to engage both parents as well as the student themselves.
Thank you. Another suggestion in your video, Katelyn, was about having more Indigenous perspectives in the curriculum. And I was just wondering if you could tell us a bit more about this. Was this something that the students mentioned that they'd like to see, the students that you interviewed? And I wonder, Maria, if maybe you'd like to elaborate on this one too, around, you know, just the complexities involved in Indigenous perspectives. So perhaps to you first, Katelyn, and then to you, Maria.
Yeah, so it was something that a theme that came through in the interviews with students, saying that they would have liked more Indigenous perspectives in the hands-on activities. So if it was, say, in biology, or, you know, to have more Indigenous perspectives on that content. And so students said they would have liked like to have that in the camp. Of course, equally important are those cultural activities that most camps do, whether that's, you know, yarning sessions or painting sessions that happen alongside hands-on activities. But this was about, you know, the curriculum of the camps and ensuring Indigenous perspectives on that curriculum.
Yeah, and I think we all are aware, you know, that embedding Indigenous knowledges and perspectives, or indigenising the curriculum, has been a long-term agenda, and particularly peaked following the Barrett Review in 2008. So many of us have been along this pathway, and we know that some universities have done an absolutely, you know, splendid job, fantastic job of embedding Indigenous knowledges and perspectives in the curriculum, while others are still sort of lagging behind, or the pace has been slow. While the pace has been slow, it's still been occurring. And one of the things in research that I had done as well was had a look in this iPlace project, had looked at, you know, why is it, or what are the concerns that academic staff have about embedding Indigenous knowledges and perspectives in the curriculum. So we often just go to the default, oh, it's fear. But I wanted to actually tease that out. Fear of what? What exactly is the fear, so that you can do something with it? Fear is just too broad of a construct. So some of the concerns that they raised, and quite interesting points too, was, for example, they knew, academic staff indicated that they knew less about Torres Strait Islander people and their culture than Australian Aboriginal peoples and their culture. Many were not even familiar with the term cultural safety or phrases along that line. Obviously, there's huge disciplinary differences here, you know, clearly. So in health areas, for example, and social work and the like, there is a obvious embedding of Indigenous knowledges and perspectives as required by their professional bodies, but as also their teachers passionately inculcate as well. But some of the other fears that was that there was a fear that they couldn't find the right information, fear of being seen to be patronising. They had a fear of misappropriating knowledge. And another fear was a fear of student resistance and negative discussion in the classroom that they couldn't handle. They didn't know also, they were fearful about getting information wrong and then not knowing who to ask for assistance. And also the survey, people responded and said that they had had little personal and or professional involvement with Indigenous peoples, which you know, undermines their confidence as well. So I thought unpacking those sorts of things are really key, because it means that we can then go forward, and I think they're all, you know, things that can be addressed.
Thank you. I might head to the Q&A for a couple of questions now. So a participant has written about how sharing that their son did an engineering camp recently, and that was to solidify their ATAR as being a pathway. And just mentioning some of the things that you touched on, Maria, about building positive relationships with other students. And the person has a question here about the follow-up from universities after the camps. And they've asked how much of that is factored into the camp programs.
Yeah, I think that's a really important question, and different camps do that to varying degrees in terms of follow-up, whether that's follow-up with phone calls, or, you know, possibly some camps do try and bring the students back together, either virtually or, you know, face-to-face. There can be, and staff talked about this, a complexity around privacy and whether they, you know, they can contact the students or contact the parents again post the camp. So that can be a factor around, you know, keeping that post-camp contact. But I think it is really key to keep that ongoing connection and relationship going beyond just attending the camp, and staff are certainly aware of that. But also staff are so busy and moving on to the next camp and the next activity that it's additional things to kind of keep working on. I know some camps, they employ their student ambassadors to do that post-camp engagement as well, to keep the connections between the ambassadors and students, which is another way that camps do that.
And I think just a bit like we were talking before about timing, this idea of understanding that camps are one of a broad, as Katelyn identified, one of a broad suite of options for outreach that people engage in, and even if those engagement activities are mapped against the ages and stages that people are going to, it's a great thing. But this post-camp engagement and evaluation are absolutely critical to demonstrating, I guess, the value and that return on objectives that we're all trying to achieve in terms of bringing about change and improving people's quality of lives.
Thank you. Another live question here from the Q&A pod to both of you. Do you have any thoughts about the kids who don't get to go to the camps, those who miss out?
Maria, do you want to go? Or?
You go.
I was going to say, like the criteria of camps varies from university to university. Some universities open their camps to anyone who might want to attend. Others are more selective in terms of looking at school results and you know, what level of they're performing. So yeah, that's right. There are differing ways that students are selected for those camps. And I know, well, some of the outreach staff who I talk to have a view that camps should be for anyone who might be interested in university. But then there's also, I guess, the other side of that, people saying, well, they don't want to set students up to be, if they're not going to be able to come to university, you don't want to be opening that opportunity if it's not going to be possible. But also that some camps, as part of that, then if they attend that camp and participate in some coursework as part of that, that guarantees them entry or a scholarship as well. So some universities are making that strong link as well.
Yeah, there's some quite sophisticated versions of camps out there, and I do get the point about not wanting to set people up for failure or disappointment, but maybe that comes down to the purpose of the camp being clearly sort of stated. And obviously the other part of it is accessibility, and is a 15-year-old going to do okay on their own, away from their family as well, if they're having to travel long distances to attend a campus? So I guess there's opportunities there to extend the footprint of it, and it's making sure, of course, that other outreach opportunities beyond camps are provided. So this is where we could get like really creative and have virtual camps, for example, and that you could have camps that are targeted at those people who are still exploring, and these could be a bit of a virtual sort of camp or camp experience, or even just a live webinar like this that would give people in regional, rural and remote areas more access to just answering, I guess, those questions of is this right for me? Will I fit there? Before making the big decision to go to a camp and to, you know, travel and all that they have to do for it.
And Nicole, I was just going to add that, I mean, outreach staff have been really creative during time of COVID. There have been online camps that have occurred, and outreach teams are, you know, being really innovative in terms of looking at having, you know, Q&A sessions or developing new websites or choosing modules out of camps that are most, that they think are the best, like 90-minute modules, and doing them online for students. There's been some really innovative work done in this space due to COVID.
Thank you. Here's another question from the Q&A pod. What are the likely implications for outreach arising from the passage of legislation recently that provides demand-driven funding, so no caps on places for regional and remote Indigenous students? So the specific questions are, will we see more outreach? Will there be more competition for students? How might we respond to these changes in the most culturally appropriate way?
Well, hopefully we will see more students from regional, rural and remote areas. Some of you may be aware I was actually on the task force for the NAPFINE review. So, and a part of that intention was to reduce barriers to Indigenous students, particularly from regional, rural and remote areas, from accessing university. So hopefully the intention is that we will have more, but also I think a part of it with focused on Indigenous students was to ensure that when universities, or if universities reach their cap, that Indigenous students are not counted in that cap, which means that they can enrol anybody who is willing and able into the program that they like. So they're not going to be they're not going to turn people away because they don't have a space for them. So again, it helps to achieve that social and address social injustice. If there's going to be more competition, I don't know, maybe that's a good thing, because it means that students will also start to understand that can actually, I guess, see their value in becoming and belonging, and that that these options are available to them too.
Thank you. So look, we've got about 5 minutes left. So I've got just a couple of concluding questions. Katelyn, can you sum up, say, 2 to 3 main learnings from your fellowship project?
Okay, well, I think one of the main learnings is that camps are really crucial, but they are just, they're part of a suite of activities. And, students talked about, that it really helped them dream bigger, or it was about meeting a community of people, and some beautiful comments from students around that, it was like a family. Family is a word that came up over and again in interviews, and that, attending a camp is a really safe space and can be a way for students to come on campus and engage in that way. So I think they are really crucial, but that, students also are doing a diverse range of other outreach activities often, and attend multiple camps or return to camps. And then also another key finding, I think, is around the need for further collaboration between outreach staff and researchers, or more, resources for outreach staff, so that they can evaluate their programs to keep on improving them, and to keep increasing those pathways for Indigenous students into university.
Thank you. My last question is to ask you about what is next for your fellowship and for your research, but we've got a little bit of time up our sleeve. So I just want to pop one more in that came from a participant when they registered, because I think it might be perhaps a bit outside of the scope of your project, but maybe you can tell us if it's been done elsewhere, or might be some future research. So the question is, many of our students are elders or older leaders and may not have done tertiary study recently or at all. Do these strategies that you've mentioned apply in the same way to this demographic, or differently? Does the research indicate any particular needs for elders in tertiary programs?
I think it's a really interesting question, and it is out of the scope, I guess, of the fellowship, because I focused mainly on outreach programs, and particularly camps that target school students, and I'm not aware of outreach camps that particularly target non-school leavers or mature age students. But I know there are, and universities do have, some universities have outreach activities for non-school leavers, and they're a really important cohort that I think, it'd be an important topic for future research.
Thank you. So to finish off with, can you tell us a bit about what's next for your fellowship, and then down the track for your research?
Well, I've got to write up the final report. I'm also having a webinar on the 23rd of November. Originally, it was going to be a face-to-face symposium, which is now a webinar. So Neshi will be advertising that, and that's tips from Indigenous researchers around evaluation for outreach staff. And I'm also just started a new research project that's funded by Neshi as well, with Bronwyn Fredericks, Tracy Bunder and team at other universities, and we're looking at completion rates and what does success mean, and what kind of impact are universities making in terms of improving completion rates for Indigenous students.
Thank you. So I can see Sarah has joined us, so we might stop there and hand back to Sarah. So thank you both very much, and thank you to everyone out there in Zoom land for your questions. Over to you, Sarah.
Thank you, Nicole, and thank you both Katelyn and Maria for just such a terrific and insightful presentation and talk. I know that I've learned an awful lot listening to this, and I'm sure others have. The chat function and the chat pod has been full of comments and positive feedback. So I'd just like to thank you all for taking the time to do this. It's very much appreciated. Now, just before we finish, I would really like to again thank you and let everyone know that tomorrow we do have another 2 sessions coming up. So there are final 2 webinars for the week, and both are looking at the disability field. So if you'd like to register for those, you are still able to register. There is some registration registration still available. We'd be really happy for you to do that. And for those of you who maybe haven't engaged with the centre yet, please do consider coming on and having a look at our webpage. We have a lot of research up there. As Katelyn mentioned, we're constantly funding research related to student equity in higher education. If you come to our website, then you will see an invitation to receive our newsletter. And also, we always have events. And we try and publicise what's going on across the sector. So please go online and have a look at what we've got there. So with that, I will finish up. And again, thank our presenters and our terrific facilitator. And yeah, really looking forward to reading your report, Katelyn. So thank you for participating in the fellowship programme. Bye, everyone.